So we are back at it and we want to improve the look of the hair system itself. As I said, I want to just clump near the jawline and less in front of the eyes and upper cheek. So I see that I can't get the effect with the length mask or the clump settings, so I will just paint on the active area attribute. I tried to get rid of the areas near the eye and fade them out a little bit more. And here we will increase the attribute a little bit more. And also a color node as a visualizer later on to see if I'm setting up the mirror node correctly, because it's not always very obvious which direction constant you need to use. That this is not the right direction constant, so I will try to see which one I will need, and this -1. So I will go in here and fine-tune the blur a little bit further. And I can see that something is going wrong with my attribute mirrors. Here we can just replace the skin input there. I will just activate my skin again. You can probably also build an interface for that so you don't have to always go back and forth. I will also increase the clump size a little bit in my references. It's quite broad and less small. I mean, you can see some of the chunky shapes coming through in the reference, so I will try to rebuild that as close as I can. And get rid of the more stroke. You can, most of the cases, you can also experiment with the stray rate, but for this character at this stage with the clear shapes in the cheeks, I really don't want too much going on there, so I will turn this to a lower value. Most of the fractal settings are just preventing the clear shapes from showing, so I will just turn that down as well. Really want very clear, visible shapes there. I will also experiment a little bit with some variation and bending in the guides itself to see if that gives a better looking result or more realistic looking result. But for that one, it's mostly straight lines. It's very linear. I think we're pretty close already. I'm just trying out stuff to see if I can get any closer or if we can leave it at that and go to the next step. What is also always helpful is to use a bend before the hair clump to just feather up the shapes a little bit more. In creature grooms, I use that all the time just to get rid of the linear look basically and add a little bit of variation and break up. That's always very useful. I will test out a few settings here and see if I can get any better result than the linear lines that I have. I often switch to the direction constants because it's easier to tweak, especially if you have a character that looks like a certain shape from one angle and not from the other angle, and you want the bending only to be applied in a certain directionality and space. For that setting, the direction constant is the best setting. So here I don't want as much breakup from the front basically, but just from the sides. From the top view, I think the bended version looks a little bit more realistic. What I don't like about this version is that it lacks like the clear readable shapes that we can see here. Even though it looks a little bit CG, I think for this character I pretty much prefer this linear look just because it has very readable shapes in the reference. I will try if I can get the silhouette with the bend in the same stage and just try to adjust the seats to see if I can get a better seat, or some of the other settings is helping because I really like the side look that it's not as linear. Sometimes it helps to also add your attribute into the iterations tab. have often as a problem in CG characters is that a lot of clumps are very parallel to each other. There's not enough breakup. And when you work on CG characters, there's always the importance of breaking that off, the shapes, and ruffling it up so each clump is not facing the same directionality, but slightly different. I'll also try if I can incorporate 2 separate clump second level clumps, which are the clumps within the first clumps, and then there's third level clumps, which would be like micro detail and stuff like that. So here's basically just a lot of testing out what works best. Houdini has a lot of settings, which is pretty nice. They all react differently to your hierarchy and what you feed into them, so it's always worth to test out all the options when you work on a character. I will try to reduce the bend a little bit with a noise mask, but it still destroys the silhouette quite visibly. So I really prefer this version where the clumps are very straight. Now I will try to give it a more realistic are both cutting off. The length is at 0.95%, and then I will use a bend that is only affecting the tips, and I will add a little bit of randomization, disable the angle, and put up random angle, so the tips will be splitting a little bit. That's usually great to use in combination with some fractals, so you're not putting this node onto the whole groom, but rather a percentage of it. So I will add a guide mask and call it fractal, set this up as a point mask, and I will use the random mask function, which basically splits off, if you use it in combination with the blast, splits off a percentage of the groom that you can set up in the guide mask. And we will not turn on the fill sample holes function, otherwise it will take forever to load. Want to delete non-selected. And put this to points. And then we copy this over once more and disable the toggle here. Then we can merge both streams into one after the blast. So here you can see it's only affecting like a few strands, and the way it's set up, it looks like it's too much bend that is applied, so I want way less, and I will try to touch that with the curve mask and the blend function on the node itself. I will also use a little bit of frizz. First of all, before using frizz, you always need to check if your CV count is high enough to run frizz on it. So I will do a test and see if that's high enough. Looks good. And I will only apply the first to the root position. When it comes to cats or like quadruplets in general, a lot of them have undercoat fur, which is like the on fur or the downy fur. So they have 3 different coatings in general. Sometimes when we go into like very high detail, we will build all of these different fur layers. But yeah, for this, I will try to mimic this effect by But here you can see that the silhouette is better preserved. So I will go for that instead of the bend or frizz. So we need to set up an outnode for the guides itself, for the skin. Of the length overall. And this is what we will use and blend over into the other system. So we will put this on manual, and this is all we need in this ingested room here. And from here, we will do the same that we did with the ears. So we will make some space here. We can just copy this whole section over. using the same attribute that we previously used with the active area. So we can just select it here. Change this one as well. Sometimes the region is not enough. Depends on what you want to achieve, how your region looks like. And you can see what the region will be that will be blended over. And this is our first preview of it. It looks very short and very sparse, but it's blending over correctly. And this looks too clean. The parting lines are too visible. My So this is just the plain interpolated hair here. I would love to have like a better transition on the cheeks, so I will take a screenshot, previous version. With Quattro, it's pretty cool if you just take a screenshot, it will be automatically saved and attached. So I will cut less hair off, so my active area will become bigger. So this works way better. I will do another check how it looks like with the blend activated, but no in the interpolated form. And I will also try to come up with a nice looking seed at this stage. But yeah, it doesn't change too much. What you can do, basically I'm trying to split off my guides here as a alembic room. So I will just write that out with a rub alembic. That will be helpful later on when you simulate and you have to gather all your guide curves. Because you're getting rid of all the hierarchy, you're baking it down into a cache. And later on you can just take that cache and animate it. It will be easier to not drag out the whole history all the time. And it will also speed things up a lot by doing that. So I will just keep the history as it is at the moment, but I will just exchange that with the cache as the input connection. And you can see that it's already a lot faster when I'm changing the seed. So this is how our cat looks like. I want to add some of the flyaway ear tips that you can see on the left side reference on the lower one. They have very sparse hair, like slightly longer than the overall hair and very thin. So I want to do that. First of all, for doing that, I need to paint a region or like a region mask for the tips, similar to what we did with the beard. And I will add one attribute to the attribute wrangle and add it into the attributes here in the paint node and paint it. Then I will also mirror that and blur that as well. So just copy that over and paste it into the list. Before we blend everything over and make some space here. Can get rid of that. I need to transfer the attribute from the skin onto the guides and then build active area that we split off, similar to what we did when we interpolated the stuff. So I have to promote it from points to primitives to not have just a random point selection, but rather the whole hair. And then we can blast that off based on the attribute. That would be perfect. So we're copying it over now. And we're deleting the non-selected. And then we will work on that stream. Don't forget to merge both streams back into one. And here we will split off a percentage of the guides based on a random mask, similar to what we did before. Blast it off based on the attribute that we just created. We have to change that to points. It's a point attribute because it's a point mask. Yeah, I'm double checking if everything works and reshuffling stuff. And I want to only work on the right stream. Merging those back in and creating that stream here. I want to make it look longer and a little bit thinner as well, and assign like a slight bend node for these hair strands. And we want to only assign it on the very tip. Connect the skin correctly, otherwise you won't be able to see any change. I will also put this in a box and call this ear tips. That's how it looks like. We will also create an attribute wrangle that will deal with the width and then